Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The mess hall of the GCS Intrepid had seen a lot in its 15 cycles of service. Diplomatic incidents involving incompatible food chemistry, fist fights over recreational schedules. That one time, a Peluvian crew member discovered that artificial gravity made their mating dance significantly more enthusiastic than intended. But nothing, and the ship's logs would later confirm this with almost comedic precision. Nothing had prepared the 230 beings present for the sight of Commander Lissa walking through the entrance at 0900 hours with 3 Rexian juveniles padding behind her like oversized fanged puppies. The first tray hit the floor within 2 seconds. A Folian navigator named Chenix, who'd been mid-bite into something that resembled purple gelatin, simply released his grip and let physics do the rest. The sound of metal clattering against composite flooring created a domino effect of awareness that rippled through the space like a shockwave. Rexians were not pets. They were not companions. They were not even animals in the traditional sense that most species understood the term. They were apex predators from a world where the food chain had exactly 2 positions, Rexian and lunch. Standing roughly 1.5 meters at the shoulder, they combined the lean musculature of pursuit predators with the raw bite force of ambush killers. Their hides were a mottled pattern of gray and deep crimson, designed for blending into the volcanic rock formations of their homeworld. 6 legs provided both stability and terrifying acceleration. Their heads were elongated, almost reptilian, with rows of serrated teeth that could shear through military-grade hull plating if given enough motivation and poor supervision. And 3 of them were currently following a human woman through the mess hall like she was taking them for a morning stroll. Lissa, to her credit, seemed entirely unbothered by the escalating panic. She moved with the casual confidence of someone who either didn't notice the chaos or had simply decided it wasn't her problem. Her standard-issue tactical uniform was rumpled, like she'd slept in it for several days running, and her dark hair was pulled into a practical bun that had given up on military precision somewhere around hour 30 of neglect. She grabbed a tray from the dispenser, loaded it with something approximating breakfast, and headed toward an empty table in the corner. The 3 Rexians followed, not wandering, not distracted by the dozens of potential prey items frantically evacuating the area, just following. Their movements were synchronized in that unsettling way that pack hunters develop, each one maintaining precise spacing from the others while keeping Lissa in their collective field of vision. "Everyone remain calm," Lissa announced to the room at large, settling into her seat with the weary satisfaction of someone who'd been standing for far too long. She forked something that might have been eggs into her mouth. "They're friendly." The 3 predators arranged themselves around her table in a triangular formation, haunches settling to the floor with disturbing grace. The smallest one, barely the size of a standard service drone, had what could only be described as a curious expression on its terrifying face. "Friendly," someone repeated from near the exit, voice climbing several octaves on the second syllable. She said, "friendly." Security arrived in under a minute, which was actually impressive considering the Intrepid was large enough to qualify as a small city. Gren, the shift commander, came through the entrance with his weapon drawn, and 4 additional officers fanning out behind him. Folians were naturally cautious species, evolutionary products of a world where everything poisonous had looked adorable, and Gren's large eyes were currently wide enough to qualify as satellite dishes. "Commander," he said, managing to keep his voice steady, despite the fact that one of the Rexians had swiveled its head to regard him with the intensity of a missile lock. I'm going to need you to step away from those. Lissa took another bite, chewed thoughtfully, swallowed. Can't do that, Gren. They get separation anxiety. They get. Gren's mouth worked silently for a moment, searching for words that could adequately address the insanity of that statement. Commander, those are Rexian hunters, Class 5 hostile fauna. They're not cleared for shipboard operations. They're not cleared for any operations. They're barely cleared to exist in the same solar system as inhabited stations. They're my team, Lissa corrected, gesturing with her fork at each creature in turn. That's Fang, that's Claw, and the little one is Runt. Guys, this is Gren. He's security, so try not to look too threatening. Fang, who was apparently the largest of the three, and easily masked as much as a fully grown human, yawned. The view it provided of its dental situation could have been used in psychological warfare. Several remaining mess hall occupants took this as their cue to leave, moving with the swift efficiency of people who'd decided that breakfast wasn't worth potential dismemberment. Dr. Wisp to the mess hall, Gren spoke into his comm, never taking his eyes off the predators. Medical emergency, possibly multiple casualties, and someone get Captain Drell down here now. There's no emergency, Lissa said, sounding genuinely puzzled. They've been fed. They're just curious about the ship. Fed, Gren repeated. What did you feed them, Commander? Ration packs, mostly. Some of that synthetic protein gel from the cargo bay. Runt likes the chicken-flavored one. She reached down absently and scratched the smallest Rexian behind what passed for an ear ridge. The creature made a sound like rocks grinding together, but slower, almost content. They're not picky eaters, but they've got preferences. The scratching thing was somehow worse than all of it. Gren had been in security for 12 cycles, had dealt with smugglers and saboteurs, and that one incident with the Peluvian mating dance, but watching a human casually pet a creature that could bite her arm off, with the same effort normal beings use to open packaging, was triggering some kind of existential crisis. Commander Lissa, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. Captain Drell entered the mess hall with the kind of presence that made junior officers instinctively straighten their postures. Colonians were tall, broad-shouldered beings with 4 arms and a natural authority that came from 10,000 cycles of evolutionary dominance on their homeworld. Drell had the additional advantage of being genuinely intelligent, which made him dangerous in ways that mere physical intimidation couldn't match. Explain. Now. Lissa stood, which was probably the first concession to military protocol she'd made since entering the room. The 3 Rexians also stood, which was significantly more alarming. Captain, I was planning to file a full report, but things got a bit hectic during extraction. You were sent on reconnaissance to Rexia 9, Drell said, his tone suggesting he was using every ounce of his considerable patience. A solo mission. Minimal gear. Observation only. Your orders did not include adopting the local wildlife. In my defense, Lissa said, and the 3 predators shifted slightly closer to her in a movement that could have been protective or possessive or both. The mission parameters changed significantly after my shuttle decided that structural integrity was optional. Drell's primary eyes narrowed, the secondary pair focusing on the Rexians with the kind of attention usually reserved for active explosives. Your distress beacon indicated a crash landing. Recovery teams were dispatched but found no trace of you at the site. We assumed the worst. Yeah, well, Lissa's expression shifted, something harder sliding beneath the casual facade. Turns out, the worst is relative. The crash site was in the middle of Rexian pack territory, and I was bleeding enough to basically ring the dinner bell for everything within a 10-kilometer radius. Had to move fast. This was clearly going to be a longer conversation than Gren's pay grade covered. He maintained his position, weapon lowered but ready, while around him the mess hall had achieved the kind of silence usually associated with funeral services. One of the Rexians, Claw apparently, turned its head to track a maintenance drone passing overhead. The movement was smooth, predatory, the kind of motion that suggested it was calculating trajectory and intercept points on pure instinct. Then it looked back at Lisa, and somehow the posture changed. Still alert, still dangerous, but waiting. Looking for permission or instruction or something that made Gren's security training scream warnings about pack bonding with a human alpha. "You're telling me," Drell said slowly, each word measured and deliberate, "that you survived 2 weeks in Rexian territory with 3 juveniles as companions." "Survived with their help," Lissa corrected. "Sir." Fang made a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, but close enough to make every weapon in the room snap back to ready positions. Lissa didn't even glance down, just moved one hand in a subtle gesture, flat palm, slight downward pressure, and the sound stopped. The predator settled, head lowering fractionally in what might have been submission or acknowledgement, or some hybrid behavior that shouldn't exist between species separated by millions of cycles of evolution. "They saved my life," Lissa continued, "multiple times, and I'm not going to abandon them now that we're back." The mess hall's main entrance chimed as Dr. Wisp glided in, moving with the fluid grace characteristic of Maloth physiology. They were roughly humanoid in shape, but seemed to be made of something between liquid and solid matter, translucent and faintly luminescent. Their species had 3 genders, and often chose to use no designation at all, which suited their role as medical personnel perfectly. Maloth were observers, scientists, deeply curious about biological systems in all their variations. Dr. Wisp stopped just inside the entrance, regarded the scene with their distributed sensory network, and made a sound like wind chimes colliding. "Oh my, this is fascinating." "Fascinating," Gren repeated, the word coming out strangled. "Doctor, those are hostile predators." "They're juveniles," Dr. Wisp corrected, moving closer with the kind of fearlessness that came from either deep understanding or profound ignorance of danger. "Approximately 8 to 10 months old, if I'm reading their skeletal development correctly through their hide density. Still in the imprinting phase." They paused, multiple sensory clusters focusing on Lissa. "Commander, do you understand what you've done?" "Fed them, kept them alive, taught them not to eat the crew," Lissa offered. "You've created a pack bond," Dr. Wisp said, and there was something like awe in their voice. "Rexians have never been successfully domesticated. They're cognitively sophisticated enough to resist conditioning, and their predatory drives are too strong to suppress through standard behavioral modification. But pack bonding, that's different. That's social structure, hierarchy, family." They moved even closer, now within striking distance of Fang, who watched them with interest, but no aggression. "You didn't train them, Commander. You joined them." Drell's 4 hands had moved to positions that suggested he was restraining himself from either applauding or ordering immediate euthanization. "Doctor, what are the risks here?" "Unknown," Dr. Wisp admitted. "There's no precedent, but based on their behavior." They gestured toward the 3 Rexians, who remained calm despite being surrounded by armed security. "They're responding to her as pack leader. That level of socialization shouldn't be possible at their age without parent figures present." Their parents were killed by poachers, Lysa said quietly. I found them starving in a den. They were too young to hunt effectively, too weak to defend themselves from scavengers. So She trailed off, shrugging. I did what anyone would do. Anyone, Gren muttered, would have called for extraction and left them to the ecosystem. I'm not anyone, Lysa said, and there was steel under the exhaustion in her voice. And they're coming with me, Captain. Not to containment, not to some research facility, not to be relocated. They're my team now. The smallest Rexian, Runt, chose that moment to waddle over to Dr. Wisp and sniff curiously at their lower appendages. The doctor went very still, which was probably wise, but Runt just made a snuffling sound and returned to Lysa's side. Captain Drell looked at his security chief, his medical officer, and the human standing calmly in the middle of a situation that violated approximately 15 different regulations. His expression suggested he was running calculations on consequences, protocols, and the sheer absurdity of trying to separate a bonded pack in an enclosed ship environment. This conversation, he said finally, is not over. Everyone clear the mess hall except essential command staff. Gren, maintain position but lower weapons. Dr. Wisp, I want full biological and behavioral assessments within the hour. He fixed Lysa with all 4 eyes. And you, Commander, are going to explain exactly how you ended up as Den Mother to 3 killing machines. In detail, starting now. Lysa nodded, settling back into her chair. The 3 Rexians resumed their positions around her, a triangle of tooth and claw, and something that looked disturbingly like loyalty. It started, she said, when my shuttle decided that lift wasn't really its thing anymore. Captain Drell positioned himself across from Lysa, his 4 arms folded in a configuration that managed to convey both authority and barely restrained frustration. Dr. Wisp hovered nearby, their translucent form shimmering with what might have been excitement or concern, possibly both. Gren and his security team maintained their perimeter. Weapons lowered, but fingers still too close to triggers for anyone's comfort. The shuttle failure, Drell prompted, his tone suggesting this better be good. Lysa leaned back, and the 3 Rexians shifted fractionally, adjusting their positions to maintain visual contact with every person in the room. Pack behavior, group threat assessment, the kind of coordinated awareness that made them so effective on their homeworld and so terrifying everywhere else. Microfracture in the coolant system, she began. Didn't show up on pre-flight diagnostics because apparently our maintenance protocols don't account for the kind of temperature fluctuations you get in Rexian orbit. By the time the alarms started screaming, I had maybe 90 seconds before the whole thing turned into a very expensive fireball. She'd managed the descent, barely, riding the dying shuttle down through atmosphere that fought back like it had personal grievances. The crash itself was almost gentle by disaster standards, which meant she'd only broken 2 ribs instead of her spine. She'd grabbed the emergency pack, stumbled out of the wreckage, and immediately understood why Rexia 9 had a standing advisory against ground operations. The smell hit me first, Lysa continued, her gaze distant, remembering. Sulfur, and something organic, like meat left in the sun. The whole planet smells like a butcher shop having a bad day. And the sounds, constant clicking and howling from every direction. I knew the local fauna was aggressive, but the mission briefing really undersold how aggressive. She'd moved fast, putting distance between herself and the crash site before scavengers arrived. Rexian ecosystems operated on simple principles: eat or be eaten, and hesitation was just a slower form of suicide. Her ribs screamed with every step, and the gash on her leg from a piece of shrapnel was bleeding enough to leave a trail. Found a cave system about 3 kilometers from the crash, she said. Figured I could hole up, treat my injuries, wait for extraction. Except the caves weren't empty. Fang made a low sound, almost conversational, and Lysa reached down to rest her hand on the creature's massive skull. The predator leaned into the touch, a gesture so domestic it created cognitive dissonance with everything else about the situation. The den was maybe 20 meters deep, Lysa continued. And there were bodies, adult Rexians, 5 of them, just butchered. Professional work, clean cuts, the kind you get from plasma weapons set to maximum output. Poachers had come through, harvested whatever they wanted, and left the rest. Dr. Wisp made a sound like crystal breaking. The juveniles? Hidden in the back of the cave, starving, dehydrated, too scared to leave because the adult pack was dead, and they didn't have the skills to survive alone. Lysa's expression hardened. They were maybe 6 months old, still dependent on pack structure for everything. Food, protection, learning how to hunt. Without the adults, they were just waiting to die. Drell's secondary eyes narrowed. So you decided to become their pack? I decided not to let them starve while I waited for rescue, Lysa corrected. There's a difference. I shared my rations, kept them quiet when scavengers came sniffing around, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that I was nursing apex predators with my broken ribs and limited medical supplies. The first night had been the worst. The juveniles were scared, aggressive, and had no reason to trust a strange alien who smelled nothing like their dead parents. Runt had tried to bite her, twice, more from fear than malice. Claw had hissed and postured, all threat display and no follow-through. Fang, already the largest, had simply watched with those unsettling predator eyes, calculating whether this new creature was food or threat, or something else entirely. I used basic animal behavior principles, Lysa explained. Consistent presence, no sudden movements, food sharing, calm voice tones, things that work across most mammalian species, apparently even ones from volcanic hell planets. They're not mammals, Dr. Wisp noted, their tone academic. Their reproductive system is closer to reptilian egg-laying, but with postnatal care, that suggests social complexity. Well, they responded like mammals, Lysa said. Took 3 days before they stopped treating me as a potential threat. Another 2 before they started following me when I moved around the cave. By day 8, they were sleeping pressed against me for warmth. Gren shifted uncomfortably. Commander, you understand these creatures mature rapidly. What's docile at 6 months can be lethal at 12. They were never docile, Lysa shot back. They're predators. That doesn't change. But they're also social, pack-oriented, and capable of recognizing hierarchy. I became the alpha because I kept them alive, and they imprinted on me as family. Drell's primary hands moved to rest on the table, the gesture deliberate. Walk me through the extraction. You were supposed to signal for pickup after 4 days. You went silent for 2 weeks. What happened? The extraction had been complicated by the fact that her emergency beacon's power cell had cracked in the crash. She'd managed to jury-rig a signal booster using components from the shuttle's wreckage, but that required returning to the crash site, which was now occupied by a pack of adult Rexians who'd claimed the territory. The juveniles saved my life that day, Lysa said simply. The adults detected me about 50 meters from the wreckage. I wouldn't have heard them coming, wouldn't have had time to reach cover. But Fang smelled them first, and the 3 of them set up a defensive position around me. She'd expected the juveniles to run, to abandon the strange alien who wasn't their real pack. Instead, they'd formed a triangle with her at the center, hackles raised, making sounds she'd never heard before. Warning calls, distress signals, something that communicated pack and threat and back off in a language older than civilization. The adult Rexians had paused, confused by the juveniles defending a human. The hesitation had given Lysa enough time to activate a distress flare. The bright phosphorescent burst enough to scatter the adults, and by precious minutes. After that, they didn't leave my side, Lysa continued. They hunted for me when my rations ran out, brought back kills and shared them. Runt figured out how to open supply containers without thumbs. Claw learned to recognize the sound of our shuttles, and would alert me when search patterns passed overhead. And Fang. She paused, something complicated crossing her face. Fang took a hit from a scavenger, trying to get at me while I slept. Tore a chunk out of his shoulder, but he didn't back down. Just kept himself between me and the threat until I could grab a weapon. Dr. Wisp moved closer, their form pulsing with interest. Commander, I need to examine them properly, but preliminary observations suggest something remarkable. Their stress responses, their social cueing, the way they orient toward you, it's all consistent with pack bonding at a neurological level. You didn't train them. You integrated. They're not weapons, Lysa said firmly. And they're not pets. They're individuals who chose to stay with me when they could have rejoined wild packs. That has to count for something. Captain Drell was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Coalition regulations are clear on this matter. Unauthorized biological imports, especially hostile fauna, require immediate quarantine and disposal authorization. Captain, Lysa started, her voice rising. Drell raised one hand. However, given the circumstances, and the fact that these creatures appear to be the reason you survived, I'm willing to consider alternatives. Dr. Wisp, can they be safely contained? Contained, yes, the doctor replied. But separating them from Commander Lysa now would likely cause severe psychological trauma to all parties involved. The bond is too established. Then here's what's going to happen, Drell said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You have 1 week, Commander. 1 week to prove these creatures can function as assets rather than liabilities. They remain under your direct supervision at all times. Any sign of aggression toward crew, any protocol violations, and we revisit the disposal option. Understood? Lysa met his gaze, something fierce and grateful warring in her expression. Understood, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Drell muttered, standing. I'm either making the smartest decision of my career or the one that gets me court-martialed. Time will tell which. He left, taking most of the security detail with him. Gren remained, watching the Rexians with the wary respect of someone who'd decided that maybe, just maybe, the universe was stranger than his training had prepared him for. Lysa looked down at the 3 predators who gazed back with eyes that held intelligence and something that might have been trust. 1 week to prove they belonged here. 1 week to show that sometimes the monsters chose not to be monstrous. She'd faced worse odds. The next 5 days turned the Intrepid into an improvised testing ground for the galaxy's most unlikely military unit. Lysa had promised Captain Drell a demonstration of capability, and she delivered it with the kind of methodical precision that made even skeptics pause and reconsider their assumptions about what constituted a functional team. Day 1 started in Cargo Bay 3, a cavernous space filled with supply containers and equipment that needed inventory processing. Scrim, the Folian engineer who'd nearly fainted in the mess hall, stood at the entrance with a datapad and visible reluctance. "Commander," he said, his large eyes darting between Lysa and the 3 Rexians flanking her, "with respect, I'm not sure this is a good idea. These creatures don't have the cognitive capacity for complex tasks." Lisa smiled, the expression containing just enough mischief to make Scrim nervous. "Want to bet?" She'd spent the previous night working with the juveniles, reinforcing commands through repetition and reward. Rexians might be predators, but they were smart predators, the kind whose survival depended on learning fast and adapting faster. The hand signals she'd developed during their time on Raxia 9 formed a basic vocabulary: stop, move, search, alert, stand down. "Scrim," Lysa said, gesturing to the engineer. "Hide 6 items anywhere in this bay. Standard contraband markers, the training ones security uses for drills. Take your time, make them challenging." The Folian complied, moving through the stacked containers with careful deliberation. He tucked the markers in maintenance panels, behind supply crates, inside equipment lockers that required access codes. 20 minutes later, he returned to the entrance, datapad updated with locations. Lissa turned to the Rexians, her posture shifting into something more commanding. She raised one hand, palm out, then swept it across the cargo bay in a broad gesture. "Search." What happened next made Scrim's datapad clatter to the floor. The 3 juveniles moved as a coordinated unit, spreading out in a pattern that covered maximum territory with minimum overlap. Their heads swept low, nostrils flaring as they sampled air currents and surface scents. Fang took the left quadrant, moving with surprising delicacy around fragile equipment. Claw worked the center, occasionally rising on hind legs to check elevated positions. Runt, smallest and quickest, darted between containers with the efficiency of something that understood spatial geometry better than most navigation computers. 4 minutes. That's how long it took them to locate all 6 markers. Fang found the first 3, using claws to carefully extract markers from their hiding spots without damaging surrounding equipment. Claw discovered 2 more, including one Scrim had hidden inside a magnetically sealed panel that shouldn't have been detectable through scent alone. Runt got the last one, the marker Scrim had placed inside a maintenance drone's charging port, accessible only through a gap barely wide enough for the juvenile's narrow skull. Each Rexian brought their finds back to Lissa, depositing the markers at her feet with the careful precision of retrievers delivering game birds. Then they sat, haunches down, waiting for acknowledgement. "Good," Lissa said simply, and produced 3 strips of synthetic protein from her pocket. The juveniles accepted them with sounds that resembled purring filtered through gravel. Scrim retrieved his datapad with shaking hands. That shouldn't be possible. The scent markers were designed to be chemically neutral." "Nothing's completely scent neutral," Lissa explained. "And Rexian olfactory systems are about 10 times more sensitive than anything we use in standard security sweeps. Plus, Runt there has figured out that electromagnetic fields have distinct acoustic signatures if you listen carefully enough." "Acoustic signatures," Scrim repeated weakly. "The creature is using echolocation for magnetic fields." "Smart, right?" Lysa scratched Runt behind the ear ridge, and the juvenile made that grinding rock contentment sound again. "They're not just strong and fast, they're problem solvers." Word spread through the ship with the speed that only really good gossip achieves. By day 3, crew members were volunteering to observe training sessions, their initial terror tempered by curiosity and the growing realization that maybe these predators weren't quite the mindless killing machines everyone assumed. Dr. Wisp became a constant presence, documenting everything with the enthusiasm of a researcher who'd stumbled onto a phenomenon that rewrote textbooks. They ran neural scans, cognitive assessments, behavioral observation protocols that would have made academic committees salivate. "Remarkable," the doctor announced during a session in the medical bay, where all 3 Rexians had submitted to examination without aggression. Their neurological development shows patterns consistent with accelerated social learning. The pack bond with Commander Lissa appears to have triggered cognitive pathways that remain dormant in wild populations. Meaning? Captain Drell asked. He'd been attending more sessions, his initial skepticism giving way to something resembling cautious interest. Meaning these juveniles are developing intelligence markers comparable to some sentient species, Dr. Wisp explained. Not language-capable, not tool-using in the traditional sense, but demonstrating abstract thinking, problem-solving, and emotional regulation that's unprecedented in non-sentient fauna. Gren, who'd also become a regular observer, shook his head slowly. You're saying the human made them smarter just by being around them? Not smarter, Dr. Wisp corrected. More socially sophisticated. Humans are intensely social creatures, and their behavioral patterns emphasize cooperation, communication, and hierarchical structures that reward learning. The juveniles adapted to those patterns because survival within the pack demanded it. Day 4 brought the real test, though nobody knew it at the time. Lisa was running drills in the observation deck, a large space with transparent walls offering views of local space. The 3 Rexians were practicing formation movements, responding to increasingly complex command sequences. Fang, Claw, and Runt moved like they'd been choreographed, their natural pack coordination enhanced by weeks of working with Lysa. Captain Drell was present, along with Commander Top, a human tactical officer who'd been supportive of Lissa's efforts from the beginning. Top was older, gray-haired, with the kind of calm competence that came from surviving 30 years of military service without losing his sense of perspective. "They're good," Top observed, watching Runt execute a flanking maneuver that would have impressed infantry trainers. "Really good. But can they handle real stress? Drills are controlled environments." As if the universe had been listening and decided to answer with characteristic poor timing, the observation deck's main entrance opened, and someone who definitely shouldn't have been there stepped inside. The figure moved wrong, all jerky, mechanical precision that suggested augmentation or combat drugs or both. Grendish, based on the scaled skin visible beneath the maintenance uniform that was clearly stolen. The species was known for producing some of the galaxy's most effective assassins, individuals who combined natural physical advantages with a cultural appreciation for violence as art form. This particular Grendish was holding a plasma cutter modified into something that resembled a weapon more than a tool. And every instinct Lisa had developed over years of combat operations started screaming warnings. The assassin's eyes locked onto Captain Drell, pupils contracting to slits. Cloaking tech shimmered around the edges of the figure, barely visible distortions that explained how they'd bypassed security checkpoints. Lisa opened her mouth to shout a warning, but the Rexians were already moving. Fang went left, cutting off the exit route. Claw went right, positioning to flank. Runt, smallest and fastest, charged straight forward with a sound like rocks being thrown into a turbine. The 3 juveniles didn't wait for commands, didn't hesitate, just responded to a threat against their pack with the kind of coordinated lethality that made apex predators apex. The assassin tried to bring the weapon up, tried to activate the cloaking tech fully, tried to do anything that might salvage the situation. But 3 Rexians operating as a unit were faster than thought, more coordinated than any individual could counter. Fang hit low, massive jaws clamping around the assassin's leg with enough force to shatter bone even through combat armor. Claw struck high, claws raking across the weapon arm and sending the plasma cutter skittering across the deck. Runt, demonstrating the intelligence that made Dr. Wisp's research so compelling, went for the cloaking device itself, tearing the small unit from the assassin's belt with precision that suggested understanding rather than random attack. The whole engagement lasted maybe 8 seconds. Security arrived 90 seconds later to find the assassin pinned to the floor by 3 juvenile predators, alive but very much subdued, and Commander Lissa standing over them with her sidearm drawn and an expression that suggested she was profoundly unimpressed with the interruption to her training schedule. Captain Drell, who'd been the intended target, looked at the Rexians, then at Lissa, then at Commander Top, who was trying very hard not to smile. "Well," Drell said finally, his voice remarkably steady for someone who'd just survived an assassination attempt, "I think that counts as handling real stress." The mess hall was significantly more crowded than it had been 5 days ago, and the atmosphere had shifted from panic to something approaching celebration. Captain Drell stood at the front of the room, all 4 arms crossed, in a posture that managed to convey both authority and grudging respect. Lissa stood beside him, and the 3 Rexians sat in their now familiar triangular formation around her, looking far more relaxed than predators had any right to appear in a room full of potential prey. The crew had gathered voluntarily, which said everything about how perceptions had changed. Folians who'd fled screaming were now watching with open curiosity. Even Scrim had positioned himself close enough to observe, though he still maintained what he probably considered a safe distance. "5 days ago," Drell began, his voice carrying across the space with practiced command presence, "I gave Commander Lissa 1 week to prove that 3 Rexian juveniles could function as assets aboard this vessel. I'm pleased to report that she's exceeded expectations ahead of schedule." There was applause, genuine and enthusiastic. Top clapped the loudest, grinning like someone who'd won a long-standing bet. "The assassin currently in custody has provided information under interrogation," Drell continued. "Apparently, there's a significant bounty on my head related to certain trade route negotiations that didn't favor some less reputable organizations. The Grendish had been aboard for 3 days, waiting for an opportunity. Standard security protocols failed to detect him. His cloaking technology was military grade, well beyond our countermeasure capabilities." He paused, letting that sink in. 3 days. An assassin had been moving through the ship for 3 days, invisible to sensors, undetectable by trained security personnel, biding time until the perfect moment to strike. 3 Rexian juveniles," Drell said, something like amusement creeping into his tone, "detected and neutralized the threat in under 10 seconds. Not because they were trained to recognize cloaking signatures or programmed to identify hostile intent, because they recognized a threat to their pack and responded with the kind of coordinated precision that military units spend years trying to achieve." More applause, and this time several crew members were looking at the Rexians with expressions that contained significantly more respect than fear. Fang yawned, showing off teeth that could still absolutely ruin someone's day, and somehow the gesture seemed almost friendly. "Effective immediately," Drell announced, "Fang, Claw, and Runt are granted provisional status as special assets attached to Commander Lissa's unit. They'll be subject to ongoing behavioral evaluation, but barring any incidents, I see no reason why this arrangement can't become permanent." Lissa felt something unwind in her chest, tension she hadn't fully acknowledged releasing all at once. She reached down, resting one hand on Runt's head, and the juvenile pressed into the contact with that grinding purr sound that still made people do double takes. "Thank you, Captain," she said, meaning it more than the simple words could convey. Drell nodded, then fixed her with a look that suggested the conversation wasn't entirely over. "Dr. Wisp, your findings?" The Maloth glided forward, their translucent form shimmering with what was definitely excitement now. They carried a data pad, though Lisa suspected the doctor had most of the information memorized and was using the device purely for dramatic effect. My research over the past 5 days has revealed something extraordinary, Dr. Wisp began, their voice taking on the enthusiasm of someone about to share a discovery they knew would cause arguments in academic circles. Rexian juveniles possess neural plasticity that's significantly higher than previously documented. In wild populations, this plasticity serves basic survival functions: learning to hunt, recognizing pack members, avoiding environmental dangers. But when exposed to complex social structures, like those humans naturally create, something remarkable happens. They manipulated the data pad, projecting neural scan images into the air above the table. 3 Rexian brain structures appeared, color-coded to show activity patterns. These scans show enhanced development in regions associated with social cognition, pattern recognition, and emotional regulation, Dr. Wisp continued. The juveniles aren't just learning commands. They're developing cognitive frameworks for understanding abstract concepts like loyalty, protection, and cooperative strategy. In essence, Commander Lissa didn't train them. She socialized them in ways that activated dormant evolutionary potential. Gren, standing near the back with several security officers, raised a hand. Doctor, with respect, are you saying humans accidentally created smarter predators? Not smarter in terms of raw cognitive capacity, Dr. Wisp clarified, but more socially sophisticated, more adaptable, more capable of functioning in complex environments that require cooperation and communication. Yes, someone in the crowd laughed, the sound nervous but genuine. So humans being overly friendly with dangerous animals is a feature, not a bug? Apparently, Top called out, grinning. We just can't help ourselves. See something deadly, immediately want to pet it, and give it a name. That got more laughter, and Lissa felt the mood in the room shift into something warmer, more accepting. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely, probably never would completely, but it had transformed into something more manageable. Respect, caution, recognition that these predators were dangerous, but also choosing not to be. There's one more thing, Dr. Wisp added, their tone becoming more serious. The bond between Commander Lissa and the juveniles appears to be reciprocal at a neurological level. Her stress hormones decrease when they're present. Their cortisol levels drop when she's nearby. They've formed what humans might call a family unit, with all the biochemical markers that implies. Claw made a low sound, almost questioning, and Lissa glanced down to find all 3 Rexians watching her with that unsettling focus. She smiled, the expression tired but genuine. Yeah, I guess we did. The celebration continued for another hour, crew members gradually becoming comfortable enough to approach and observe the Rexians from closer range. Runt seemed to enjoy the attention, while Fang maintained a dignified aloofness that somehow made people more eager to earn his approval. Claw just looked perpetually confused by the whole situation, which was oddly endearing for a creature that could disembowel most beings without significant effort. Captain Drell pulled Lissa aside eventually, his expression suggesting the shift from public commendation to private conversation. This worked out, Commander, better than I expected. But you understand the responsibility you've taken on? I do, sir, Lissa replied. They're not pets. They're not tools. They're partners. That means I'm accountable for their actions and their well-being. Good. Drell's secondary eyes focused on the juveniles, who were currently letting Scrim examine their claws with scientific fascination. Because what you've accomplished here, it's going to attract attention. Good attention, mostly, but also questions about applications, about whether this can be replicated, whether other predator species might respond similarly to human socialization. Lisa hadn't considered that angle, but of course, it made sense. 3 Rexians functioning as effective security assets would make people wonder what else might be possible. Sir, I'm not interested in starting a predator recruitment program. Neither am I, Drell assured her. But the galaxy is watching now, and humans have a way of changing expectations about what's possible. Just be prepared for that. Before Lisa could respond, the ship's communication system chimed with the priority tone that meant incoming distress signals. The mess hall quieted immediately, decades of military conditioning overriding celebration instincts. Top moved to the nearest console, pulling up the transmission data. His expression shifted, something grim, settling into place. Captain, we're receiving emergency broadcasts from the frontier station. They're under attack. Attack by what? Drell demanded, already moving toward the exit. Rexian hunting packs, Top replied, his voice tight. Multiple adult groups, coordinated assault. Station defenses are holding, but they're requesting immediate assistance. They're reporting casualties, significant structural damage, and... He paused, reading further. They're specifically requesting any personnel with experience in Rexian behavior protocols. Every eye in the mess hall turned to Lisa. She looked down at Fang, Claw, and Runt, who had gone very still, their postures alert and focused. They couldn't possibly understand the specifics of what was being discussed, but they recognized the tension, the shift in pack dynamics that signaled something important was happening. Captain, Lisa said slowly, an idea forming that was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. How fast can we get to Frontier? 6 hours at maximum slip speed, Drell replied. But Commander, you can't seriously be suggesting that we bring 3 juveniles who speak the language of the attackers? Lisa finished. That we use the fact that Rexians are pack-oriented and might respond to social cues from their own species? Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Top was grinning again, the expression sharp and calculating. It's insane. It's also our best option, Lisa countered. Standard military response to Rexian attacks is containment and elimination. High casualties, lots of collateral damage, and it never really solves the problem because you can't kill entire populations. But if we can communicate, if we can establish that the station isn't a threat or negotiate territorial boundaries. You want to talk to them, Gren said, sounding like someone trying to process a concept that violated fundamental assumptions about reality. You want to negotiate with apex predators actively hunting sentient beings. I want to try, Lisa corrected, because the alternative is a bloodbath. And maybe, just maybe, we can prove that humans don't just adopt monsters. We teach them there are better options than being monstrous. Captain Drell was quiet for a long moment, his forearms shifting through positions that suggested intense internal debate. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Get to the hangar bay, Commander. Bring your team. All of them. Lisa turned to the 3 Rexians, who were watching her with that focused intensity that suggested they knew something significant was happening. She made a gesture, the one that meant follow, move, we go together. They stood as one, falling into formation around her with the kind of precision that no longer surprised anyone. All right, Lisa said, mostly to herself but loud enough for the juveniles to hear. Time to introduce you 3 to your distant cousins. Let's hope they're as reasonable as you are. Fang made a sound that might have been agreement or warning or both. They headed for the hangar bay, A human and three predators walking side by side, about to attempt something that would either revolutionize interspecies relations or get them all killed. Somewhere in the universe, Lisa thought, predators were about to learn that humans didn't run from monsters. They adopted them, trained them, loved them, and turned them into family. And honestly, that should terrify everyone. But it should also give them hope.